Hello everyone, and very recently we spoke about the potential future mini DLC. I'm not sure exactly what they're going to call it when it comes to Neferata, as we do know that they've got some smaller DLC plans. Now, I think it's a fair assumption that these DLCs, even though they're smaller, will still have patches alongside it, likely focusing around those races to bring them up to Game Freak standards, or giving them a proper refresh where needed. The vampires themselves, well, they do need an update just to kind of bring them in line, and to be fair, while their rework in Warhammer 2 was decent, they've fallen behind on everyone else, and it's likely because they haven't had any DLC in a while. If there's no financial incentive for the player base, then there's no money being generated, then there's not really going to be that much of a dramatic update. So let's talk about that today, as I've been thinking about the vampires for a decent amount of time, and I think I've found some ways that they can be improved. So the tech tree is something that is fairly decent, I'm not going to lie, in terms of vanilla, but it can be improved also. Just adding more text, separating them, doing the whole system of just like multiple tabs would be nice. I do like what's basically a book system there, where it's 4 sections, each kind of representing different stuff. What I do feel like could be done is one focused around necromancy, so that the actual bringing back of your monsters, buffing up your troops and so on, like a full tab on that. And then finally a tab focused around mortal servants and infrastructure, because it kind of ties in together. You know, these settlements that you've actually got, right, they're being held up by mortal servants in most cases, because the vampires still need to eat. Generally what I'd say is just a few more texts here and there, kind of removing the scroll bar too, because it's kind of annoying. But yeah, just a basic cleanup here and there. Buildings are generally fine. I think that what they need to do is kind of like play around a little bit with what is where. What I would like to see here is dedicated buildings for your bloodline. Right now we've only got the von Carsteins, and when Neferata comes in, we're going to have the Lemians. Hopefully in the future we'll have more vampires, but it'd be really cool if there were dedicated buildings with specific perks and specific bonuses if you dedicate. For example, if you're playing as a von Carstein, you should be able to naturally recruit Empire State Troopers. It was actually part of their 6th edition army list. If you play as Lemian vampires, well, then you should have access to some bonuses towards your like inner infiltration cults and stuff. This is something that I talked about for Neferata in a possible DLC update, where she could have some sort of cults influencing the back end of other factions, so you'll get the bonuses from that. Then, in the future, if we do end up getting Strigoi, Blood Dragons and stuff like that, there could be specific stuff for them there too. I don't want to talk about that just yet, it's too much, because, well, we don't know if we're ever going to get them, but like the idea here would be, oh, Blood Dragons on foot, being specific to the Blood Dragon faction, and you'd have to build up that specific tree. Naturally, we can't forget about the Necromancers, because we do have 2 Necromancer legendary lords, Heinrich and Ghorst. Well, their tree can focus up on buffing up zombies even further, some faction-wide bonuses to make them as viable as possible. The idea here is the building tree affects your gameplay, so depending what you pick, you have access to certain things. It does mean that von Carsteins are going to be a bit more common, because right now you've got 2 start positions, 3 possible legendary lords, but 2 start positions. But what I think it does is it kind of future-proofs for possible future DLCs. I'm not saying that Creative Assembly might do more DLCs in the future. Personally, I would really love a Strigoi DLC, because that's what I played in 6th edition, but hey, you never know, right? And if they leave the door ajar, maybe there's incentive. Actually, as a further note, what they could do is make all the buildings anyway. I said, oh yeah, it's just future-proof it and so on, but have it so the specific Strigoi tree, Necroc tree, and Blood Dragon tree are built up, doable, but only by minor factions, which would then have access to that. There are Strigoi minor factions, Necroc minor factions, and I don't think there's a proper Blood Dragon one. The Red Duke doesn't really count there. So bring in the Blood Keep, wherever it's supposed to be now, because it keeps moving in lore, and it's moved again recently thanks to the Old World. It could allow for people to play with a minor faction, so no unique bespoke mechanic, kind of like how you're playing most of the vampires right now, actually. And that again leaves the door ajar. They notice a lot of people playing that well in the future. Character packs, that's something that I pretty much am sure that Creative Assembly are exploring into. So further to that, when you use a faction locker, you've got this, right? So you've got the Strigoi sides of Monkeyman, the Strigos Empire. There's a lot of minor factions there, and that would give you a reason to play as these. So even though they have no bespoke mechanics, they do just have that starter kind of like dedicated building. It would open it up. It would give you a reason. Maybe at that point, Creative Assembly might open it up to start allowing for people to use minor factions without, needing to use Mixu's Unlocker, which I think ultimately would work, because I think a lot of people would just kind of want to play from a different start position and not just use a mod to make a character move to different locations. Just spitballing here, I just think that it's a really good idea. Obviously, I could be wrong and the developers might have something else in mind, but I really do think that that would work. This would further have an effect on the Bloodline mechanic. You see, the Bloodline mechanic right now is you get some kisses for a variety of different means, and then you spend it on stuff like troops, because basically this gives you access to Sylvanian crossbows or faction-wide bonuses and so on. Alongside a buffed-up lord, you get a Strigoi, a Von Carstein, Blood Dragon, Lamian, or Necroc. I kind of think that this needs to go. One, the Lamians look awful. It's one of those things that need to be redone properly, because they're not supposed to look like just like high gothic ladies. And then the Necroc, well, it's just an awful kit bash. It just looks like they got access to some modding tools. This was back in Warhammer, was expanding from what it was originally. Keep in mind this game has drastically changed. So, if we're going to get the specific buildings, I don't think that this should be a thing. In fact, I think that these should be turned into generic lords for the specific bloodline. So if you're playing as a Strigoi minor faction, you've got the Strigoi Ghoul King, and then you've got the stronger version with an unlock for it, just to keep getting more and more. So it's kind of like a right, with the Lizardmen, where you can just keep getting Slan and more Slan. Same thing with this. If you're playing as a Von Carstein, you've got the normal Vampire Lord, and then you've got access to the Von Carstein Vampire. Blood Dragons, again, normal Vampire Lord, but if you keep using that special right, you'll get access to the Blood Dragon actual generic Lord. They'll each have to be retooled a little bit and be made a bit more viable, also have different abilities and so on, and obviously redo the Necroc model. And they can even go even a step further and make like an even better Necromancer, like a Supreme Necromancer, which would then be used by the Necromancer-based factions. This mechanic itself served its purpose, but I think it can be improved by that quite dramatically. If blood kisses are used for those lords to unlock them and just to have them in your pool, that means that that resource is constantly used. Eventually that resource ends up getting like so much, you get a lot of them, and there's literally nothing that you can use it on. To further enhance that, the Bloodkiss Lords could actually have some sort of skill nodes in their skill tree which will need some blood kisses to make them even stronger. So you'll get some extra bonuses, but you'll need to spend blood kisses when you get to a certain rank. The idea there is make them even stronger, they're doing their thing. I think something like that would work. Again, give you a reason to spend blood kisses. So now you've got the option. Do I want that other special lord, or do I want to keep buffing mine who's immortal, who's obviously going to be doing a lot of damage, who's got a pretty good army with him? Can I make it even stronger? I would like to see a resource implemented in the form of like human servants and so on. I think Thralls works because that's what it was called in Mordheim, or just, I don't know, just if they want to go really dark, call them cattle. Essentially, you'll be able to get, like how Sunesh has and the Dark Elves and so on have dictacs. So for faster growth, for public order, maybe even to increase the raised dead pool. It's the same thing as the Sunesh stuff, which I know some people might not be too keen on, as, well, it's getting reused a lot lately. But it kind of makes sense with the vampires of using the humans, draining their blood, and making the settlements a little bit better for that. Because the vampires have a bit of a slow grow, but if other factions are getting stuff like that, they need something to kind of push them a little bit faster, so you're not just using zombie doomstacks, right? They work, they're viable, but I think a lot of people stay very comfortable with the zombies and don't really work towards getting like the really cool shit like the Valk. Alright, so now we have to start speaking about the Legendary Lords, because while some of them do have their own bespoke, unique mechanics, there needs to be something more to each of the lords, barring Menfred, as Menfred does have the Books of Nagash. But bespoke, unique mechanics for each of the lords would be really, really good, just to kind of elevate the races, right? Not every race has this. If you keep in mind, like the Warriors of Chaos, they don't, but they've got their own rosters per se. However, if you look towards the Empire and how unique each of the faction plays, it adds so much more reason for replayability, despite the fact that most of you will end up just playing Call Friends over and over. But yeah, I'm not here to shame. Vlad and Isabella should have access to the Elector count mechanic upon taking over the Imperial seat. Right now it's Altdorf, so you'd have to go all the way there, build up a building, and then you'd gain access to this. It does mean that at the beginning, Vlad won't have access to anything, or Isabella, remember they are a package deal here. But to further enhance this, I would say that instead of a direct copy, as you start taking over the Imperial seats, whether it is by actually physically taking them over or by having different vassals there, you'd unlock more and more Imperial troops. The idea here is Vlad and Isabella by the end of it could have the majority of the Empire roster alongside them, but they'll be limited in the same way that you've got the demons with the Warriors of Chaos, right? Kind of like a gift mechanic. This would also mean that if you take over specific areas, you should be able to bring back minor factions. If you go to Talabecland, yeah, you can enthrall Talabecland and bring them back as a vassal, same way as when you're playing as the Empire, you can bring back those specific minor factions. They're there to be your thralls. The way I see unit unlocks happening is the more seats that you control, the more units will become available. State troopers will naturally be part of your roster as it starts off, you know, some swordsmen, spearmen, some crossbows, but you'll need 2 seats to get access to handgunners. Then you'll need 3 seats to get access to some basic cavalry like the pistoliers and so on. You need all of the seats to be able to get your hands on a steam tank. And even then, that would be incredibly limited. So rather than having a maximum of 4 or whatever, like the Warriors of Chaos, you'd only be able to have 1 steam tank. Because it would be working on a unit pool system. So you could have access to maybe 10 state troopers, you'd only have access to 5 pistoliers or 1 steam tank. It would be a point system rather than a camp system. The seats could be under control of yourself or by the minor factions. The idea here is just giving you a reason to do something differently. You could try it both ways. Heinrich could be rather simple. Well, first up, Krull needs to be turned into a proper legendary hero for him specifically, because I think that would just be nice. The summon is meh. I mean, it's alright, but it just doesn't feel like he's got a lot of uses, right? Proper skill line, make him a lot more killier, all that type of jazz. Alongside a mechanic of trying to find multiple ley lines throughout the world to further enhance his studies. The idea here is he's trying to find magical fonts to increase his ability for his constructs. Maybe a construct system kind of similar but stripped down to the molder mechanic. The idea here is improving zombies, improving constructs if we get some constructs in the next DLC, like the VIKRAM and so on, because we know he had a lot of constructs and stuff in his own dedicated army list back in the day. I think that would help out tremendously to kind of set him apart. He's a necromancer lord. He definitely needs something to make him special, right? Something just a little bit out there. And it's kind of a shame that the molder mechanic has not been used ever since, right? Like, it's not bad. Definitely could be used a little bit here and there. And we're better than for a necromancer who's going to be making more and more monstrosities. And then Ghorst, I'm going to be very honest with you, I have no freaking idea. This is the problem with Ghorst. He's a very unknown character, literally just appeared in Sigmar's Blood. The fact that he's a legendary hero is still just, it bothers me. He's better now, because obviously he did have that minor update that just kind of made him a little bit stronger and so on. But I can't look at this character and go, yeah, he needs this, he needs that. This is always going to be a very awkward thing when it comes to Ghorst, when it's a character just basically pulled out of a supplement rather than an actual big book, or a character that barely just has any lore. If anyone's got ideas for Ghorst, I mean, feel free to comment them, because, yeah, no idea. And then lastly, well, you know, we've got the Red Duke. He's in-game. Give him some voice files, actual mechanics. It would be kind of nice to have, like, an Undead Bretonnia faction. Everyone's spoken about it. Obviously, there's very popular mods that do that, but it'd be great to see it done officially, especially since he's been there for a fair amount of time. It would be great to see him actually have a proper start, some mechanics focusing around a kind of undead version of Bretonnia with undead vows and stuff like that. I think that could work out really, really well. It's been in people's mind for a while, especially as Mousillon is its own thing. Keep in mind the Red Duke is not supposed to be from Mousillon, he's from Aquitaine. But, yeah, I think it could work. What worries me is, like, he would take up an FLC slot, where really most of his work has been done barring voicing and just stuff like that, but I think it would work out, and then eventually just other vampires come in through form of DLC and FLC as time progresses. It's just, I know a lot of people want the Red Duke to be playable, and at this point, I do too. Like, fully playable. He's already playable, but you know what I mean. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Let's start a bit of discussion. Hopefully Creative Assembly takes this and has some ideas already. Maybe they can enhance some ideas. I don't know. I'm just hoping that the vampires get some love when Neferata gets her Fable DLC, because they've fallen behind, and I'd like to see them be a bit better. I've been painting a bunch of vampires lately, so I'm on a vampire kick. Have a great day, guys, and I'll see you all again very, very soon.